Hello everybody, welcome to another video. Today is the 3rd of June. Today we'll be doing a very brief frontline update and then talking about some other events that are occurring both within Russia and within Ukraine that are associated with the war, because there's been a lot of strikes that have been pretty deep within the heartland of both countries respectively. So let's begin just by talking about some of the changes to the front line, which are relatively minuscule, but within the context of the battles that I will be talking about, they are actually pretty important developments. And so starting off in Maryinka, where we do actually have some minor Russian gains. So in my last video 2 days ago, I was saying that the Russians controlled about 70% of the town. Well, now it's closer to about 80%. So here's the full extent of the town of Maryinka. Spans really this entire area that I'm circling. And so to the east, it's more on the Donetsk suburbs, and then to the west, it connects to the town of Hyorhivka. And you could see that only about 20% of the town is still left under Ukrainian control, and that it's being held by the 2nd and 3rd battalions of the 79th Air Assault Brigade. And so the reason why we're seeing this renewed push by the Russians in this specific direction is due to the fact that some Chechen detachments have been moved recently to the front lines around Maryinka, and they have the task of finally clearing out the town after really 9 years of fighting over here, which has really left the town totally devastated. And if we want to talk about the specific gains that were achieved over the past day or so, then they look something like this. So in the city center, the Russians actually were able to advance, and so I was talking about in my last video how they could flank the city center, but it seems like they're just advancing through it head first, because it's not like there's any sort of large structures anymore in this area. A lot of it has been flattened. What remains are the skeletons of some of these houses, and in the area that I have circled, or looks more like a rectangle, in that area, most of the houses are just one story, and so there's not that many good places for cover. It's a good opportunity for the Russian tanks to advance. And then again, the Russians have a huge artillery advantage over here. They have a lot of very good field artillery positions around the city of Donetsk. And so now we're seeing this push towards pushing out the Ukrainians from Maryinka entirely. And then to the north, we also know that they have worked to secure the flanks. Over the past day or so, they were able to push even further to the west by taking over several different houses on Ivano-Franka Street. And again, they continue to push west along Ivano-Franka Street, and they have been able to make gains adjacent to this pond over here. And so now they have also been able to secure new positions to the north of the core of Maryinka, which will allow them to push and advance even deeper into Maryinka from the north. And so that's what they did, just gain 10% more of the town. And so that's pretty significant within the context of the battle. But if we zoom out, we'll see that Maryinka is not really that important as a linchpin, because there are so many other towns and there are so many other fortifications in this area in the entire Donetsk city axis, which is a very, very large area. It really spans from about Novomikhailivka all the way to Avdiivka. And so around this entire line, this entire axis, you have so many different defensive nodes. And Maryinka is just one of them. It's one of the most fortified ones, which is why we talk about it so much. And it's also one of the most contested ones. But once Maryinka falls, a new town will become the most contested one. But if we're looking at a sort of wider objective, then Kurakove is certainly a Russian objective that's up there, because it is a local command hub with a lot of field artillery stationed over there, and it is a junction of many different roads. And so you could see how an advance could be pushed in this direction towards Kurakove, although that is certainly a long-term endeavor by the Russians. If we go to the north, we see that the Russians were also making some pushes around Krasnohorivka. Again, these are very, very low-level pushes. And so the gains that they were able to achieve over the past 1 or 2 days were around the fields to the north of Krasnohorivka. So the front line before what I'm talking about looked something like this, where the Ukrainians had sort of a foothold across the rail line, pretty close to Krasnohorivka. But since then, the Russians have been able to push the Ukrainians back a little bit, take over some trench lines, some bush lines, and also the rail line. And so they've created a little bit of a buffer around the town of Krasnohorivka and have now advanced a little bit closer to Novokalinove. But again, this entire polygon is extremely small, and it is just some fields with some trenches included, and so it is mainly just positional fighting, not really indicative of any sort of upcoming offensives. Now, if we want to go to Bakhmut, there's really no frontline updates around here, as again, the Russian units are taking a huge pause in this specific sector. There were a few days where it seemed like they might have been continuing attacks on the flanks to the north and to the south of Bakhmut, but it seems like that's all petered out for the moment. And in the meantime, we're seeing the continual transition of Bakhmut from the Wagner group. They really withdrew all of their forces on July 1st, or June 1st, sorry. And since then, you've seen the integration of new Russian units. So according to British intelligence, they have spotted the movement of 2 VDV units in particular. And so one is 76 Guards Air Assault Division, which previously was stationed around Kremina, and so now they've been moved to this city. And then also the 106th Guards Airborne Division, which was already stationed around the southern flank of Bakhmut, so maybe they were moved a bit towards the north. But I still have them around the Klishivka area. And so you do have the VDV units that have been moved in. And there's several others that I have already added in myself from just local reports of their movements. And they've been here for a while, actually. They were supposedly on the flanks, but it's possible that they've only recently been moved to the front line around here. And then also, according to the British intelligence, there were 2 additional separate brigades that were mentioned. But the specific units were not specified, so I can't add them to the map until the British Ministry of Defense announces which units those were. And so again, you're seeing the transition of the Russian groupings in this area from Wagner to the Russian Ministry of Defense, and especially the VDV units. Now, let's talk about some of the events that unfolded, but not really on the front line. So, first of all, we have news that really came out a few hours ago that there were 6 Tu-95s airborne, and they were, of course, airborne over Russian airspace. And so they were flying around the Caspian Sea. This is really the launch zone of the Russian strategic bombers, because it is a relatively far distance away from Ukraine, and it is still within the effective range of these cruise missiles which are fired. So you can see here's the Caspian Sea, and so they were flying over this launch zone, the 6 of them, carrying either KH-55, KH-102, or KH-555 cruise missiles. And so there were sirens in every single oblast within Ukraine a few hours ago. At the time, it was about 2 or 3 a.m. in Ukraine. And so in terms of specific hits, it's very hard to tell which cities and which targets specifically were hit because of a lot of the restrictions that Ukraine has on any sort of recording of damage. But we do have some just general reports about explosions, which could just be interceptions, of course. So we heard explosions in Vinnytsia, Kirovograd, and Cherkasy, and Khmelnytsky, and in Kiev, Sumy, and Odessa. So basically all the cities around here. This is not something special. This happens a lot, basically on a weekly basis by now. And we very rarely see any sort of reports either by satellite imagery or by video on the ground of what was targeted. So I don't expect this to be any different. Now, another thing that's very interesting that I've seen reported on today is the fact that now Russia is utilizing military balloons. And these military balloons, attached to them, you have these corner reflections. So I actually open up how this looks like. So credit goes to this account. I'll leak their tweet. So here you can see that the Russians, they have begun launching these military balloons. And you can see on the bottom they have the corner reflections. These have been spotted in eastern and southern Ukraine. And in essence, what this does is that basically You have the Ukrainian air defense batteries, and you have their radars. And the point is that the corner reflections, they basically reflect the radar waves that the air defense systems are trying to send out. And so they send back these radar waves to the radar system that's trying to identify different signatures throughout the airspace. And it creates this false radar signature, which makes the balloon and basically all of the area around the balloon seem like it's a significant target. And so then you have the air defense systems and the radars being confused because they think that the balloons are the target, and then they misidentify it for a drone or for some sort of missile. And if you send a lot of those on bulk, which you could easily do with a balloon, then you could very quickly overwhelm a lot of these systems, and then they would be diverting their attention away from actual drones and actual missiles towards these balloons. So it's just another strategy that the Russians have come up with, very cheap, innovative way to try to distract the air defense systems of the Ukrainians. Meanwhile, the Ukrainians are also launching strikes of their own. And yesterday, a very significant strike occurred on the port in Berdyansk, which is pretty far away from the front line. It is about 90 kilometers away from the front line. So we're going to zoom in on that. So here we have a map of Zaporozhye Oblast, and Berdyansk is one of the more significant cities within this oblast, and it has been under Russian control really since the early March period of 2022. And it's pretty notable because in either late March or early April, there was a very significant Ukrainian strike on the port of Berdyansk that targeted a lot of the naval infrastructure over there. So it's not the first time that the port has been hit. And it is one of the more significant ports within the Sea of Azov for the Russians. They've been utilizing it pretty extensively, and they have a very large inventory over here. And so, according to these reports, and there's also satellite imagery to confirm this, there was some strikes on the port of Berdyansk. So if you zoom in, you can see the port is over here. And the Ukrainians, they utilized the British Storm Shadow missiles. And so these are meant for deep strike missions. And they have a range of about 250 miles or 400 kilometers, around that amount. They utilize stealth technology to minimize their radar signature, and they are very precise. They use GPS guidance systems, and so they hit the port of Berdyansk yesterday, 90 kilometers from the front line, so it is within the range of lethal effectiveness. And from the satellite imagery, you can see the before and after from May 31st to June 3rd, and you can see that there were two specific warehouses within the ports. Actually, I'll show them to you over here. These two warehouses, if you zoom in, you'll see them. These two warehouses over here, they were hit right in the middle, and whatever inventory was within these warehouses was decimated. And at the same time, we didn't just see Storm Shadow missiles utilized by the Ukrainians. We also saw, according to imagery that was geolocated to Berdyansk, that there were some Tochka-U missiles that were intercepted by the Russians. And this is corroborated by videos from locals that show how the Russian air defense systems was able to intercept at least the Tochka-Us, which means that not only were Storm Shadow missiles used, but also Tochka-Us. And Tochka-Us are pretty notable for being way less precise than a Storm Shadow. So it's interesting that they would be utilized. Maybe it was utilized in order to distract the Russian air defense systems, and then the real damage was caused by the Storm Shadows. But either way, this does indicate that Ukraine's capabilities for longer range strikes has increased due to new shipments, and so that is something to keep an eye out for. And so, yet again, thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Goodbye.